Welcome to our event. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and doing yet another Zoom. I know it can be exhausting. I've been in three today myself already. Um, First, I'm Taylor Newell. I am the founder and executive director of Who Speaks for Me. We are a national nonprofit that works to interrupt and dismantle the trauma to prison pipeline for women, girls, and LGBTQ people, specifically working on Black, Indigenous people of color who are impacted by the justice system. We are an advocacy and activist organization. We provide direct services as well as advocating for change within the system as the way that it impacts people who are women, girls, or LGBTQ people. I am a Black lesbian. I spent 4.5 years incarcerated. I conceived of Who Speaks for Me while I was incarcerated because of what I noticed the intersections between trauma and the people I was doing time with. I noticed that there was a direct correlation between that, and that's where the birth of this comes from. This event is something that I've been mulling around in my head since 2014. Mary Wilson, who's one of our panelists, was released from prison a couple weeks before I was, and she had done decades behind the wall. And I noticed that her reentry was not going quite so well, and there were lots of struggles. And back then, I thought I really want to do something to raise awareness about this, so we can get our elders out of prison. Um, and over the years, Mary and I have sort of kept in touch loosely, but this idea came back to me when Lakeisha came home, and so that's where it came from. And I'm really honored that the National Center for Lesbian Rights (NCLR) are sponsoring this event with us. And with that, I will hand it over to Amy Whalen.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Whalen. I'm a senior staff attorney at NCLR. We were founded in the 1970s by lesbians who at that time were facing discrimination in their jobs and also losing their kids in custody battles with ex-husbands. And we have been building on that feminist foundation for years now, and we now do legal and policy work on behalf of the entire LGBTQ community all across the nation. We have an immigration and asylum project, a family law project, a DC policy office, our Born Perfect campaign to end conversion therapy, and a legal team that litigates civil rights cases around the country. I am so honored to be here to represent NCLR with this amazing panel. So I'm going to shut up now so we can get to them. But I'll talk a little bit more about NCLR's criminal justice work later in the program as well.
So I just want to introduce the people who are not on the panel. You've already met Amy. Megan Young is the board treasurer for Who Speaks for Me and has been a part of this work since I came home from work, from prison, not work, since I came home from prison. And Megan will be handling the Q&A at the end. And Quinita Ennis is our board chairperson. She's going to be moderating this event. So with that, I hand it over to Quinita.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Quinita Ennis, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. As mentioned before, we certainly understand that we're living in a different world full of Zoom calls and texting and just a lot of screen time. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time, finding the time to join us tonight. So I would like to welcome and thank everyone for joining us. And this is my first time moderating. So please bear with me, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that I honor and respect our panelists tonight. So what I want to do is a quick introduction of everyone on the panel, and I'm going to read bios.
Before you do that, Quinita, I forgot to do some housekeeping. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Before Quinita gets started, just 2 housekeeping things. When you do your Q&A, or if you drop something in the chat, you're not allowed to ask people why they were incarcerated. That's not why we're here. And also, I just want to do a content warning. There will be discussion of rape and violence in this. So before a person speaks, if they're going to be discussing that, they will let you know. So if you need to turn off your computer, for that if it'll be a trigger, but just letting you know that. Sorry again, Quinita.
Okay. And also just for a little bit of content, I am home with a 2-year-old. So you may hear a little rumbling in the back, but she's a joy. So I'm gonna get started with our first panelist, Lakeisha Wilson Bay, who is a mother, sister, friend, and was born here in Washington, D.C. She was incarcerated at the age of 21 and was recently released in December 2020 at the age of 42. During her 20 years and 11 months of incarceration, she was housed in several different federal institutions: Urbana, Danbury FCI, SFF Hazleton, Tallahassee FCI, Dublin FCI, Carswell FMC, and Aliceville FCI. I know that Lakeisha was welcomed home with a lot of joy and happiness. And as someone who knew her in Danbury, I'm so happy to have you home. Welcome home, sister.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next panelist is Mary Wilson. Mary Wilson, more affectionately known as Junior, was incarcerated in her early 20s and served 33 years, returning home in her mid-50s. In addition to her sentence, Mary was also on supervised parole for 6 years. When she was released, she was faced with many difficult challenges because society is so different from prison. Mary had to adapt and learn to navigate through the system that had less resources for someone her age. Even though she was faced with these challenges, she gained employment at the Marriott Marquis Hotel and is a housekeeper aide. However, due to the national pandemic, she has been unemployed since early last year. Our next panelist is Dee Farmer. Dee Farmer is a legal expert and consultant for the National Center for Lesbian Rights, a legend in the transgender rights movement. She was the first transgender plaintiff to bring a case before the United States Supreme Court. In 1994, her landmark case, the unanimous Farmer versus Brienne decision, established that prisoners have a right to be protected from harm and that prisons are responsible for their safety. The case stems from the sexual assault she suffered at an Indiana federal prison where she had been placed among male inmates. A transfer levied upon her punishment while in a minimum security facility. In 1986, she was given an exceptionally harsh consecutive sentence of 20 years in federal prison. In 1986, she was given an exceptionally harsh, 30 years in a state prison for nonviolent crimes. Cited by thousands of courts, Farmer versus Brienne was also foundational to the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003. I'm now going to give each panelist a moment to give us a little background and do an introduction for themselves. Mary, would you like to go first?
Yes. I was incarcerated at an early age. I was 22 and I was given a sentence of 23 to life, 15 years to life, and 40 months to 10 years. And when I received this sentence, I was devastated because I had just given birth to a child. I had no clue. I said, I had more time than I'm old. How do you do it? And when I arrived in Auburn, West Virginia in 1982, 3 weeks being there, my unit staff sent me to see the psychiatrist because they said they didn't understand how I handled my time by being so young. So when I went to see Dr. Brislin, she wanted to put me on medication and I refused it. I said, I didn't do drugs in the street and I'm not gonna let you put me on drugs now because it's what you're gonna do, numb my time. So I just had to learn to deal with it. And it like I said, it was devastating. How do you do 2 life sentences in 10 years. It's like you're the forgotten one. And I had to learn how to live, you know, because being incarcerated, you're away from your family, and you just got to adapt to everyday life in there, which is harsh because it's degrading, because you had the staff uh, opening your door, having you to squat and cough, and it was very demeaning as a human. You had no rights. I was just a number, and that continued on for 33 years. And it, I guess I prayed that. I think that's sad, because people ask me all the time, how did I do it? It was that I had a praying mother that prayed for me, and I had sense enough to pray for myself. And because how do you live inside of a wall where you got people dictating everything to you? They have control of your entire life. They tell you what to eat, when to sleep, what to wear, who you can talk to on the phone, who can visit you. They have total control. You're just a robot. So I had to just constantly pray and just take out time. And I read a lot, to try to keep my sanity. And I walked, and then I met some very interesting people. So we just communicated, and we became a family within ourselves. And that carried on for 33 years. And I was shipped from prison to prison. And it only got worse because I'm getting older, and I was denied a lot of programs due to my sentence, because inside, if you have a short sentence, you can take any program. But when you have a life sentence, a lot of programs that could help you, if and when you get released, you are denied. And once you are ready to come home, like when I was ready to come home, it was too late because I left prison 3 months later. So I couldn't do anything. And with that being said, it's still a challenge to this day.
I'll move on to. Go ahead, Lakeisha.
Hi, my name is Lakeisha Wilson Bay, and I was incarcerated at the age of 21. I had a 2-year-old son that I had left behind in 2000. Um, Coming to prison, it really takes a toll on your mentality when it's your first time being locked away from your family. Like Murray said, it's very harsh. It's very demeaning. It strips you away from reality. You have to deal with things that you wouldn't normally deal with. You have to protect yourself in there. As a woman being on parole, you had to walk a straight line. And if you didn't walk that straight line, that could cause you to not be able to meet the parole qualifications for coming home. I had 36 to life. And I basically went in with the mentality of being angry because I was very angry about the harsh sentence that I had gotten, even though I take full responsibility for my actions. But being a first time offender and not really having a chance, that really will destroy you and your family. But with the help of God and my family, me taking the programs that they did have to offer to help me with my self-esteem, with my conflict resolutions, with my victim's impact, with my anger management, it kind of really changed the way that I thought. In my beginning of doing my time, I had gotten a lot of trouble because I had to protect myself sometimes. You would get petty little shots over just things that were so trivial to us, but it wasn't trivial to the institution, like having paint on underwears could cause you not to come home to your family, things like that, or eating a a bell pepper and an onion that belongs to the kitchen could actually stop you from coming home. But during my time, I programmed, I went to college classes, I got my GED, I worked at a Unicorn. I did everything I could to prepare myself for coming home one day. And I've always had a praying family. I've always been a praying person. I always sought God for anything. So during that time of my 21 years of incarceration, I never gave up on my freedom. The only thing I did was continue to push myself and change the things about myself so that I could come home to my family. Eventually in last year, May, I had caught COVID. I was a very healthy lady, but never had a medical issue, never took medications, never ever took a psychotic pill. And I had caught COVID. And during that time, I felt like I was going to die because when I actually brought my problem to the staff, they looked at me like I was crazy because they couldn't believe that I was still walking around and that I was so healthy that I couldn't be a person. I couldn't have had COVID with all the symptoms that I was describing. So I went through a whole lot of distress because of that. And because of the COVID, I'm still messed up on my right side. So yeah, prison, it can be harsh for a woman. It can break you down mentally, physically, and emotionally. But because I was a strong praying woman, I made it through. I'm still healthy, even though I still have complications on my right side. And I just prayed my way through, and I'm just grateful for my freedom.
Keisha. D, open the floor for you. Open the floor for you to do an introduction. Ready?
We can't hear you, Q.
I'm sorry. D, we're going to open the floor for you to do an introduction. Can you hear me now? My apologies. D, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi everyone. My name is Dee Farmer. I was the petitioner in the case of Farmer versus Brennan that was accepted and ruled upon by the United States Supreme Court. They gave a unanimous decision that prison officials can be held liable for sexual assaults upon transgender and other vulnerable inmates. I went to the federal prison at the age of 19. At that time, I had a 20-year federal sentence and a consecutive 30-year state sentence for a total of 50 years, all for nonviolent fraud type offenses. My appearance before the court at 19 as a trans woman was highly criticized by the judge, the attorneys, and the prosecutors. But I continue to present myself as a trans woman because I did not know any other way to present myself. I entered the Federal Bureau of Prisons in 1986. Went to a maximum security penitentiary. Spent about 7 or 8 months in segregation while they decided where I would best be fit. I was transferred to a lower security institution in Virginia, where I spent a year and a half before being transferred to Oxford, Wisconsin, where I spent about a year before being transferred to the United States Penitentiary and Terre Haute, Indiana. I spent about a week in the segregation unit while I was awaiting classification at the Terre Haute, Indiana prison. And when that classification was finished, I was released to the general population. And within a week's time, I had been sexually assaulted, raped, and beat up through a conspiracy of three of other male prisoners. And since that time, I have used all of my resources and abilities to litigate prison issues, including criminal issues. And I continue to do that even though I am out of prison, and I continue to do it despite the adverse negative implications that the prison would put me through for being a jailhouse lawyer. And I look forward to sharing more of my story with you.
Dee, thank you so much for sharing your introduction. I appreciate you being so open and honest about what happened to you. So now I'm going to pose a few questions to our panelists. And after I pose the question, you all feel free to jump in as you feel ready. Our first question is, when you received your sentence, how did this impact you mentally? Dee, since your mic is off, you can go first if you like.
Okay. When I first received my sentence, I was really devastated by the harshness of the sentence. And I knew personally in my heart that I had got that sentence because I was transgender. But when I entered prison, it was not myself that I was greatly concerned about, but it was others who did not know how to stand up for themselves or put their complaints to the prison officials. And so I became an advocate of other prisoners' rights. And that is what I have done for the last 25, 30 years. And what has kept me going through that, going despite the adverse consequences, is that along the way, I have won cases, motions, and have helped change the actions of prison officials. And those small joys bring me a greater joy, almost as great as having a case before the Supreme Court.
Mary, would you like to speak?
Yes, for me, after I received that sentence, because I had to find placement for my child who was a baby, and I had to figure out how to tell my mother to keep from devastating her. So I gave it to her in months, but when I talked to her later, she gave me the sentence. She knew how many years. So that was really hard, and she couldn't take my child. And like, my girlfriend had my daughter when I got locked up, but I know with the time I had, that relationship wouldn't last. So I wanted my child somewhere that I could still, have contact with her. So I had asked one of my aunts, but she wanted to adopt her, so I said no. And then my uncle and his family took her, and I kept contact, but then they tried to eliminate me as her parent, and they wanted to become her parent. And so that was hard for me. And like now, even now that I'm out, I'm having to build a relationship with my daughter because she thinks my uncle and his wife and their siblings is her siblings, and it's not, So then I saw that, I realized that my incarceration had an impact on her because now she's been in trouble, and when I came home, my whole family is dead except for I have one living uncle. And when I got here, even though I obtained a lot of skills because I spent most of my time helping others. And when I got to the halfway house, I signed up for project empowerment for to get a decent job. But the day I went there, I just turned 55 and I couldn't join because they said the cutoff age was 54. So then I went to my church, and so they helped me to get a job at the Marriott. Now, first I got a job at Chef Jeff's. I've never cooked in my life, so that's, and that was $5 an hour plus tips. And I had to juggle that money to pay a $600 rent. But through the grace of God, I did it. And then I got Marriott, and now I'm just, every day I learn something because I feel my job taught me how to deal with people, and I had to refrain myself because inside you keep yourself to yourself. And now dealing with people in society, it's a whole different concept. We were always on the defense in prison and didn't communicate like people do in society. So, and it's still challenging at times. But I've made it without incident, and I got off parole, but it's a struggle. And I think it's going to be with me the rest of my life.
Lakeisha, would you like to speak? You're on mute.
When I first received my sentence, having 36 to life, and it being my first offense, I was really devastated. I was devastated because I was leaving behind a 2-year-old son who didn't deserve it. I was leaving my family members. So the challenging thing for me when I first went to prison is that it was me and my sister, and I had other co-defendants, and they put us on lock for 15 months for 23 hours a day. And I think that really tried to break me mentally, but I didn't allow it. Me and my sister had to be shackled from foot, black box, handcuffed. Anytime we went to a visit, anytime we had to have a medical appointment, anywhere we went in that jail, me and my sister had to be black box. We would shelter from everybody. We couldn't have visits with people, and they wanted to put me on medication, and I refused it because I knew nothing was wrong with me, and I knew that I would be able to get through that 15 months, 23-hour lockdown, which means that you're in a cell by yourself, that you don't come out for but 1 hour, and you don't interact with anyone, because they said my case was a high profile case. So after that, I did go into the federal custody, which I was allowed to mingle. But once I started mingling, it was hard for me to mingle with people because I have been isolated by myself in a cell for such a long time. And I think that was hard on my mental. But eventually, I got through it. Surviving in prison is really hard for a young child. But I made it, and now I'm just struggling with the isolation again because I don't really like to be around people. But I know I have to get myself together so I can go out there and be a better person in society. So I'm learning how to talk. I'm learning how to speak with people. I'm just learning how to adapt and adjust. And it's only been 2 months, but with the help of God and my support team, I'm able to do it, and I'm becoming good at it.
Thank you for sharing, Lakeisha. And let me tell you, I understand the struggle when you first come home. Don't rush yourself, take your time. It's going to be okay. You're stronger than you think. And you have an amazing story. And the fact that you're here sharing it shows of your character. So stay strong. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to move on to the next question. As you all aged in prison, did you receive the appropriate medical and mental health treatment? And if you want to share a little bit about that experience.
Um, During my 21 years, I really never had any serious issues as far as with medical, because again, I was a healthy young girl, I had disease free, my mental state. But when I did catch COVID, that was the worst day of my life because I felt like they ignored my symptoms, they ignored my health, they ignored everything that I was presenting to them. I had a blood pressure at 170. I had my heart rate was above 110, and all they can tell me was that I had anxiety. It wasn't nothing wrong with me. And I knew my body because I've never been sick. I've always worked out. I've always been active. And then they started putting me on high blood pressure medicine. Then they went to trying to put me on suffocate, something for my digestive system. So it was like they were just giving me things without properly diagnosing me with the right things, like taking me out to a medical, to a hospital so they can do x-rays or CT CAT scans to see why wasn't I breathing properly? Why was my lungs inflamed? Why was I having these back spasms in my right? Why was I keep having this constant cough? And they kept totally like disregarding it. I would put in sick calls every day, and they would not answer. So I had to start writing up the institution, writing them up. And finally, when it almost got to like the region and close to my court hearings and stuff like that, that's when they decided to put in for me to get a CT CAT scan to see what was really wrong with my back and my lung area. And why did I have this persistent cough with me? But I think at that moment I knew that the medical didn't care, the prisoners didn't care. They wanted to cover up the fact that it was multiple women having COVID and could possibly die from it or have long-term effects from it because they wanted to reopen their institutions because they were losing out on staff and things like that. But during my time of my 21 years, I have seen multiple women die because of the lack of medical treatment, the lack of concern when they come in, they having complaints about their issues. I've seen many women die. I've seen many women die because they caught a person had a disease and they gave them false results, and all the time they actually had cancer or things like that. Being at FMC Carswell was really a tragic time for me because in that area, in that environment, it's nothing but sick women. So I seen a lot of death around me, but doing for medical, they're no good for us. They look at us like we just a number, like we not human, and that's that.
Thank you for sharing. Dee, would you like to share about your experience?
Sure. For most of my time in the federal system, the federal government did not provide any care other than counseling for trans women in federal prison. The last 4 years of my sentence I spent in the federal medical center in Butner, North Carolina. And when I got to Butner, what I saw happening with the inmates was so disturbing that I could barely have peace within myself. The medical centers for the Federal Bureau of Prisons is where they send inmates, female and male, they have them for both, when they have run out of options as to what is wrong with the person. The inmate usually goes repeatedly to the doctors at the home institution complaining. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dee, we can hear you.
Okay. The inmate usually spends a number of months or years complaining to staff at his originally designated institution. And most of the time they tell the inmate to take Motrin, or they prescribe some other ineffective medication. And if the problem is serious, it persists, and eventually the inmate ends up at the medical center. The majority of those inmates end up dying at the medical center. They have over 200 deaths each year. And it is not odd or unusual for inmates in the medical center to see a body on a gurney with a sheet over it being wheeled to the prison mortuary. And I thought that it was so sad because some of the prisoners were so young, and it just seemed as if they had gotten help, before their condition, if they had cancer before they got to stage 4, if they had HIV or AIDS before they caught a major infection. It just seemed if somebody somewhere had tried to help them, they would not have been on that gurney. And that inspired me to move my fight from criminal cases to compassionate releases for aging inmates or inmates with serious medical problems. Um, the inmates at the medical center who are sick, they are kept in a room by themselves. The nurse comes in and gives them their medication, but they don't have any visitors. They don't have many of them don't have the ability to read or write, and they're just stuck in the cell. And the only thing they're doing there is waiting to die. And I think it is just the saddest situation that one can find themselves in.
Thank you. Thank you, Dee, for sharing.
You're welcome.
Okay. Mary. I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay. We know that reentry is a huge mountain to tackle for anyone serving time. However, when you have been incarcerated for decades, you are a woman or from the LGBTQ community, what happens when you come home? I want to start with Lakeisha.
With me coming home, I had a 3 lawyer support system. The Wire, they supported me since I've been home. CFLS has supported me. Other organizations have supported me. I think my reentry was kind of different from others that was coming home because it was their time. for me, I had already had a plan, a 12-step plan before I was able to be released from prison. So I had already had to have people saying that they were hired me letters. I had to have medical, I had to have programs already lined up. And with those organizations, with some of the women that have put these organizations together, they had came from prison as well. So I was able to regain the things that I needed as far as my birth certificate, so security card, my ID, food stamp, clothing, um, therapy. So my reentry was kind of easy a little for me because they have had so many things for women coming back to DC with their reentry. So it has been a blessing with all the help that I was getting from people I didn't even know welcoming me home. My biggest struggle right now is me finding employment. I was with Project Empowerment during the time that I came home, and they have a great program when it comes to teaching you how to do interviews and things like that. But when it comes to you getting that work experiencing and going on the site, I've been having trouble with that. And with that being said, right now I'm still with Project Empowerment. I have a site that I'm at. I don't know if the person is going to hire me or not. I'm being paid by DOES. Some of the times, like I was waiting on Project Empowerment to place me, and because of that, me staying home, I didn't get paid for that. So I was just sitting at home. I was being penalized because their time frame and me sitting home waiting for them to help me find a job placement. So right now, what I'm doing is trying to look for employment somewhere else so that I can have a full-time job and be able to take care of myself.
Thank you. Dee, would you like to share your reentry for us, with us?
She couldn't hear you, Q. You went out.
Sorry, my apologies. Dee, would you like to share your reentry experience with us?
Sure. Um, First, I'd like to say that the Bureau of Prisons do not prepare inmates for reentry into society. They don't start providing reentry materials until the person is 90 days from release. They don't have any sources for you to obtain medical care. They don't have sources for you to obtain employment, and they don't have um, resources to make sure that you have food and the things that you need, including a place to stay. And when I left the Bureau of Prisons, I thought that all of those things would be available, but in fact, none of them were. And I found that there was very few places that provided housing to trans women coming out of prison. I have been lucky because I was able to work as a consultant with the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and that gave me the ability to obtain housing and the necessities that I need. But I know for most inmates that leave prison, there's nothing available to them. And that is the reason that many go out into society and begin to commit other crimes and eventually find themselves back in prison.
Thank you, Dee, for sharing your experience. Mary, would you like to share yours? Off mute.
when I came home from prison, I was devastated just driving through DC because it had changed. And when I got to the halfway house, the very next day, they put me in a van and took me downtown, and I had to be fingerprinted, photoed, because they had took me out of the system. I was a dead woman walking, and I would go to my supporters, who was a minister. So she tried to walk me through it, but they would give me a pass, and I went to CVS. I got to Minnesota Avenue. I was devastated to cross the street, and I was praying. I said, God, I hope I don't look as scared as I'm feeling. And I went over, and my first purchase was 6 bottles of water because I had a time limit. But I was so overwhelmed when I walked into CVS because I'm seeing things I hadn't seen in over 3 decades. And I got sick in the halfway house, and 2 staff put me in a car, took me to Howard University, and dropped me off and told me to call them when they finished. So I called Reverend Cooper because I didn't have a clue what I'm supposed to do. And I ended up being hospitalized for 5 days. And it was the Reverend that helped me. So then after I got over that illness, I came back, and so they would send me to try to find housing. But everywhere I went, they asked me for my ID, my federal ID, and they sent me for clothing. And the lady, I gave her all of my credentials from prison, and she gave me 2 identical yellow T-shirts and 4 bus tokens. And that was that. And then when I went to try to find housing, I was denied because I wasn't under mental health, substance abuse, or HIV positive. So then again, I'm struggling. So when I was getting ready to get out, they sent me down to 2nd and D Street, and I didn't get in there. And so I called Catholic Charities, and a lady, one of the ladies there, took me into her house. So I stayed with her while they tried to help me find housing. And then the halfway house sent me down to the mental health department, and they said nothing was wrong with me. So everywhere I was turning to try to get help, I couldn't. And when I applied for jobs, I was denied due to my age. And God blessed me. I didn't give up. I kept trying. And I think even though I never done housekeeping or housekeeping aid work in my life, when I got the job, it afforded me insurance, and it was a union, so it gave me a sort of protection. And so now that I don't have that, it's like I'm back to square one, because I go online, I try to get a job, and even though they say they don't discriminate because of age, I overqualify for most of the jobs I apply for, yet I get denied. I'm now 62 years old. What am I gonna do if my job don't reopen? I don't have enough coins in Social Security because this is the first time I've worked in my life. I didn't have a job prior to going in. So it's like they say it's resources, but it's resources for young people. It's not resources for people that have done decades inside. So when you come out, if you don't have a support team, you're in trouble. So, like people can work till they 70. So why would Project Empowerment deny me because I turned 55? But these are the places that's supposed to help you. C. Sosa, they had job programs. I go, do all the work, They haven't got a job from them yet. You know? So you just, my thing is I just have to be strong, and like I call Novell so often because there's a lot I don't know. When I went in, we had we didn't have touch tone phones. We had the dial phone. You know, I didn't know. I had never been on an escalator in my life. You know, so everything is like here. I'm growing up now. Things I should have known when I was a kid. And like Dee was saying, the prison doesn't prepare you for this. You know, and I've always thought that I would die in prison. You know, I've been denied so many times. You know, even my first time, I had done 23 years and 4 months before I met the parole board. And when I met him, the lady told me that I did not fit in, I wasn't in parolable guidelines because I fell under 193 months. What they did, they added that 109, they had actually added 198 months to the 23 years I had done, and told me and saw me again in 5 years, at which time you're not parolable. I got superior programming twice, but where do you take 24 months off of life? You don't. You know, so the prison, they just house us and try to just control us under medications and demean us. And it's very degrading. It's not about rehabilitation. You know, we're the forgotten ones. You know, how can you tell me you incarcerate me for 3 decades and I want to take a program, but because I have a life sentence, I can't take it. And when it comes time for me to come home, it's too late. You know, after 33 years, the prison didn't give me 1 dime of gratuity, not 1 dime. How I had money, my church had given me a check when I arrived in DC for $500. So it's like they throw you to the wolves. But through the grace of God, we will work, we will grow. It's hard, and it's gonna be hard.
Mary,
Mary, we're here.
for sharing your,
Juanita.
go ahead, babe. Go ahead.
And another struggle for me is, like she said, with being away for so long, you're dead to the society. So I'm having problems getting a bank account. I having problem getting my stimulus check. I haven't got the first one because we did it in prison, and I still haven't got anything. It's just hard for us because we don't have no sense of direction. Like sometimes I don't even know how to use a card. Sometimes I don't even it's embarrassing because they don't teach you those things in prison. So I'm having problems with my name, my birth certificate, just getting any type of verification with my identity because they don't know who I am. I've been gone for so long. So I don't know if people have used my social security number. I don't know if I'm supposed to use my prison name that I was under, or I'm supposed to use my birth certificate name. It's just really hard on a person's mental when you have no sense of direction. So those are a few things that I just wanted to point out to, as far as trying to come back and regain some type of normalcy with your life and your true identity coming back into society. It's hard because I don't even know who to contact to try to figure out, who am I? Am I Lakeisha Wilson Bay, or I'm Lakeisha Wilson?
Yeah.
So I want to just take a moment. Um, Quinita, thank you for moderating that. And I just want to take a moment to honor the way the emotions that are coming up right now. They're real. Um, I did 4.5 years, and so I know how hard it was for me, and so I can't even begin to fully comprehend the depths of struggles that Mary, Dee, and Lakeisha encounter day to day, trying to regain their lives, trying to be visible people in this society. And so that's one of the reasons that we're doing this, is we want you all to see what's happening. One of the things that they've all talked about is financial struggles. So while Who Speaks for Me does do a small stipend to our participants, I'm going to put it out there. People are getting their stimulus checks. Some of you are okay financially, and I'm going to drop the women's payment um, details in the chat when this is over. And I would encourage you all to consider making a donation to them. I will also put the Who Speaks for Me donation link in there in case you want to make the donation to us, and just designate who you want it to go to. At this moment, we're going to turn it over to Megan to put the questions from the audience to the panelists. If you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A. I see some people have put their questions in the chat. Megan, I don't know if you've seen those, but we are going to turn it over to Megan, and I don't know if Amy wants to come back on. She might have some questions she wants to put to the panelists, and Quinita as well might want to come back with the camera in case you have questions yourselves, but I'll leave that up to you all.
I'll try and summarize and read out some of the questions that have been asked. So the first one is, what are the most outrageous policies or rules that you ran up against in prison or during the reentry process?
The most outrageous rule that I ran up against in prison is defending yourself. Someone can come up and hit you, and if you try to just as little, just cover yourself or touch that person, you're charged with that. You're charged with that fight, and it causes people their life, because a lot of people in prison really don't start a whole lot of trouble. They really try to walk away from stuff, but all you have to do is lie and go on the investigation and say that she hit me, or you can have a scratch on your arm that didn't come from that person, and you're being charged. And there you go, your whole life and your record is messed up because of that. I think that was one of the most outrageous things they could have done. And I think it keeps us in bondage with things like that. Like I say, getting shots for having paint on your underwear just because you want to paint your name, or on some socks, or maybe on your cup or on your headphone. It's called contraband. I think some of those things are very outrageous because it doesn't help you. It hurt your record when you have a parole date and you have to go up into the parole and they see those little minor things. People get parole hits because of things like that. It stops people from being able to come home to their families because of something so simple as having a logo on your clothing.
And for me, it was with some of the staff. They judge you by me being gay and being an aggressor. They would write you shots for anything. Prime example, I had some disinfect and Downy in a bottle to clean my cube, and I left it there, and they locked me up and told me that that container with disinfect and Downy tested positive for alcohol. So I went to the shoe. Then once you go to the shoe, they strip your room, and any containers that you have purchased through commissary that has been opened, if only used once, they throw it away. You know, and when I went in prison, you only making 11 cents an hour. If you went to Unicor, it was 42 cents. Then they implemented a grade 5, which was 22 cents. So, and we had to pay for everything. And if you didn't have family supporting you, when you get your monthly check, you can't even buy your hygienes. And then for them to throw it away, that is demeaning. And to be falsely accused is worse. So the staff are permitted to do anything, and you're wrong just for the simple fact you're an inmate, even though the situation, you're not wrong. You're only right if they want you to be right.
Dee, do you want to tackle that question as well?
Sure, the most outrageous policy that I encountered in the Bureau of Prisons is it's not really a policy, it's a practice of theirs that during certain situations, they will strip search inmates altogether. They could have, like 10 officers and one at each inmate door, and they will tell them to come out the cell and strip search. And so you have inmates watching you being strip searched. And I challenged that in the federal court and was successful, but I do not think that the Bureau of Prison has changed that practice. I know that they still strip search women with women and men with men.
Yes, they still do it. I had recently, before I was released, I was walking down a walkway, was called to my job over the intercom, and during the process, a lieutenant came out, pulled me to the side, took me inside the officer station with no probable cause, and just strip searched me for no reason at all. And then they tell me that they were sorry.
Thank you, guys. So what is one thing you wish you would have known about the reentry process?
Just knowing how to, you talking about before we come out in reentry, or just once we're out here, the reentry process?
I think once you were out, or just that process, like what was so unexpected that you wish you had been better prepared for?
Just knowing how to adjust to society, because like we say, the ones that's been away for 21 and plus years, we still afraid to like be in certain areas with crowded people. We don't know how to really use a card when you go to the store. Like she say, cars in the streets. Just it's the little things that give you fear. And I wish that inside of prison they would kind of help you with this process before you get out of prison.
Anyone else want to add to that one?
I think the hardest thing about the reentry process is that the prison don't prepare you for the realities that you will face in society. The reality that you may not have anywhere to sleep, the reality you might not have no food, the reality that you may not have any clothes, and the reality that it costs for to do anything in society. You need money. But the reentry process doesn't prepare you for that. And I think that the reentry process needs to be from the very beginning, teaching inmates that they themselves need to prepare and find resources that will help them get out of prison, stay out of prison, and be productive.
One of our attendees shared that there's a statistic out there that 42% of people in women's prisons identify as LGBTQ plus. And so the question is, did that match up with your experience? And what can people on the outside do to support incarcerated LGBTQ plus folks?
They can have some type of program to help the women that are with the LGBT society, as far as, because you have a lot of lesbian and you have a lot of gay people in prison. Again, they get discriminated against because of that. They get treated a certain type of way. So there needs to be something in place, even though they do have the rule and policies that they can't discriminate, they still do that. But the prison itself needs to put some type of policy and be firm and stern with it, with the employees there that's overseeing us.
I want to say something about that question. So in prison, it's against the law to be involved sexually. It's a new charge. Not that sex isn't happening in the prison.
Yes.
And I think that for me, what I noticed during the time that I was in is that there were a lot of people who did engage in relationships. Now, were they gay before they came to prison? Many of them were not. What is their life after prison? I don't know. But I know that I am a lesbian in the streets, not in prison. I wasn't. But I do know that there are a lot of relationships that are romantic. And I think that when people are doing time, that companionship is important. And it just can get a little tricky if people get caught. And sometimes they'll say, oh, I didn't want to participate in this. And sometimes they didn't want to. So it can be really tricky. There are a lot of queer people in prison. I mean, there's a lot of queer people in our society. I don't, as far as helping people, you all can reach out to Who Speaks for Me. Our website will be live this week. We're going to start letter writing to LGBTQ and Freedom Overground. You can go to their website. They particularly work with LGBTQ people who are incarcerated. I'll turn it back to the panelists.
Anyone else want to answer that question, or I can move on to the next one? So one of the questions we had is, has anyone on this panel connected with the mayor's office on returning citizens affairs? And if so, what was your experience like? And if not, there's an offer to connect to the services that the office provides. Taylor, I know perhaps you could illuminate more on that question.
Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar with GC, we have something called MORCA, which is the Mayor's Office on Returning Citizens Affairs. And I'm not on the panel, but I'll just say that I did connect with them. And then I wrote an op-ed piece in the Washington Post about how horrible they are. So I don't know if the other people have, I don't know if Mary and Dee and Lakeisha have been there, but it's predominantly geared towards helping men. And their budget is very top heavy for salary. And the office of the not Office of Attorney General, but I can't remember who it is, one of the OG or somebody, they actually 5 years ago issued a long report condemning the Mayor's Office for Returning Citizens Affairs, the MORCA, for not meeting the needs of returning citizens. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the panelists.
Yes, now I can speak on when I came home and they took us to Orca. They had a computer program to teach you how to use a computer, but they also were supposed to help us get in a non-driver's ID which they didn't have funding, and so they told me, and I had to go to a Catholic church to get a stifling to get obtain a ID, and the computer class was the basics, which we didn't teaching you just how to use a computer. We learned that in prison. And as far as to any other help, it was nothing. It was just, we go there for 3 hours. It's just to get out the halfway house because you didn't learn anything. There was not a program of help.
So what was one thing that you were looking forward most to returning?
The most important thing I was looking forward to is coming home to my family was one, but the other most important thing is gaining a job and getting my own home, my own apartment. Those two are the most important things to me that I want to do. And that's what my goal and my focus on right now is gaining employment so that I can have my own housing.
Yes, I agree with that because I'm in a housing program, but it's like I'm in prison because it comes with stipulations. No males can come to your apartment, which you share with another individual. You cannot have visitors past 10. And I tried to explain to him that my father was elderly. My father couldn't even come and visit me. I have to lock my door. So it's just another side of prison for me. You know, you have to monitor everything because it's like you're in prison because you're sharing this space with another individual that you don't know. It's just so happened both of you were homeless and they placed you here. And I couldn't obtain a job where I could afford a housing in DC. I've been on DC housing list since 2010. It's rough.
So what's one thing the average person who's not as familiar with the prison system can do to support the imprisoned population or the recently returned?
I would say that the most important thing that they can do is to support the national organizations that help or assist LGBTQ prisoners or women prisoners. And sometimes that support could be just, sending out flyers or sending out cards to the inmates. I think that what inmates need most during their term of imprisonment is to be inspired because the prison takes so much away from you. You have nothing to look forward to. And so if you can somehow give them a glimpse of hope, I think that you have done your job in a big way because there are hundreds and thousands of prisoners that are just in prison waiting to expire, or at least that's how they feel.
How about for the rest of you?
For the re-entry out here, I think the most important thing that the organizations I feel that they need to help, they could help with, is again helping us with reentry. basically as far as employment. I do know that there are some type, I know that there are a bit of challenge because of the COVID, but there's still jobs out there that's hiring. And we need employment and we need housing. And I think that's the most important thing, because without that, that right there will turn someone who's not, who's giving up back to the streets. And that's where a lot of problems come in at. When people don't have employment and they don't have a place to stay, I think that's a big problem. So I think that the organizations and things like that that's out there, I think we really, really, really need that real support, because they got these organizations out here and they're getting funding and they supposed to be helping us, but we're getting and we going to job placements that we're not even guaranteed. They're still making us go out and search for our own jobs and not guaranteed that we're going to get a job. So I think that that's something big for women and men that's coming home, getting a job and housing.
Thank you. And for our last question, do you stay in contact with anyone that you were inside with?
Yes. Because I know it's important. When you don't have a support system out here and you don't have anyone showing you that you care, that you still matter, it gives that person on that other side that feeling of giving up. And when you have that feeling of giving up, you have the tendencies to get yourself involved with things inside the prison that's illegal. And I mean that by, you have staff who sleep with inmates, you have staff that bring drugs into the inmates. It's so many things inside the prison system that can stop you and could hurt your future when you give up and you have that mentality that you don't care because you have no one out there to support you and care. So they have this tendencies to turn to relationships, turns to drugs, turn to staff, things of that nature. So if we start having that support out here for the people in there and fighting for them to help them with reentry or giving them more help with their legal help, because a lot of women in prison need legal help. I think that would be a great help.
So
And
with
medical,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
and medical, because a lot of women are dying back there in prison because of the medical. It's not good at all. They're losing their lives and they shouldn't have to.
So with that, I'll just say this as far as staying in touch. Quinita and Mary and I all did time together at the same place, and here we are today. Um, and I believe Quinita and Lakeisha were together at one place, and they just reconnected when we did the practice for this. So there is some need, although I swore when I was incarcerated that I wasn't going to talk to anybody I did time with. In fact, I had nightmares when I was in prison that people would be finding me and saying, if you don't do this for us, we're going to tell people you're incarcerated. I'd be like going to work in my dream. And of course, now I do this work and I want people to find me, and they do call me. So there are people who stay in touch. I want to sort of wrap this up so that we can so that I can have Amy Whalen talk a little bit about like what they do for their litigation for women who are incarcerated, and their non-litigation resources. And then we'll come back and I'll do a wrap up for us and just cover some things that I think are important. So with that, Amy.
Much. First, I just want to thank the panelists, and I think that if this wasn't already clear to people watching this today, I hope it is now, that living in a prison or a jail, especially.
Amy, can you speak up? It's kind of hard to hear you.
Sorry, let me fix the setting and just make sure I'm not getting lost. Is that better? Great. Sorry. I just wanted to thank the panelists. I know it's traumatic to talk about this, and I think if it wasn't clear to people watching this before, um, living in a prison or a jail, especially as a woman and especially as a person of color and especially as a trans person, is one of the most horrific experiences a person can have in this country. And I think that we all need to start thinking about prisons and jails as what they really are, which is public health crises and places where that are hotspots for human rights abuses. And the stories that Mary and Lakeisha and Dee told today really illustrate that we dehumanize people. Prisons and jails are used not for any helpful or good reason in this country, but to oppress and violate the human rights of people who are in them. And so I really appreciated the discussion about what is it that people can do. And I loved the answer, find organizations that are doing great work, places like Who Speaks for Me, other groups around the country, of course, NCLR. We try to focus our work on clients who are the most marginalized, the most at risk, and the least likely to be able to hire an attorney. So one recent case that we litigated was on behalf of a Native American transgender woman in Idaho who needed transition-related surgery. And we represented her and won on her behalf. And during COVID, in July of last year, she obtained surgery in prison that she desperately needed. We also at NCLR have a youth and a family law project that focuses on abolishing the child welfare system as we know it, since that system, like prisons and jails, has historically targeted low-income people and poor families of color, especially Black lesbians. We're also part of an anti-poverty national network, which includes over 100 national, state, and local organizations that work on anti-poverty and anti-hunger movements. Tyrone Hanley, who is our senior policy counsel in Washington, D.C., leads that work for NCLR. And Tyrone also focuses on the criminalization of queer and trans sexuality and people living with HIV. So he was, for instance, a co-creator of the End Bad HIV Laws campaign, and he leads our work on sex worker rights issues, including sex worker decriminalization and reforming sex offense laws. So, NCLR is in those spaces and along with many other organizations. So I hope, as the panelists were saying, and as other people were saying, that people watching this will find the groups that speak to them and who are doing this work and go and help them in whatever way makes sense for you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank all the panelists. Before we close, I just want to. There's some notes that I was taking as the women were speaking, as the panelists were speaking. It is a stigma in our community about mental health. So I just want to say that when Mary talked about how when she came home, they were saying, "Oh no, you don't have mental health, you don't have substance use disorder, and you're not HIV positive, so we can't help you with housing." There is no way you can do a year in prison and not have mental health issues. It's a trauma. It's a severe trauma. If you do 33 years in prison, when you come home, you have trauma related to that. So that's one thing that we can definitely start advocating for is for treatment when people are released, better treatment when they are incarcerated. I'm a person with PTSD and major depressive disorder, and the mental health treatment was just terrible in prison. And thankfully, when I came home, I was able to find that. So I wanted to think about like advocating for mental health for people who come home, our elders, to return to society. The other thing is that everybody talked about housing being an issue. One of the things that Who Speaks for Me is going to be doing is launching a housing vouchers movement for returning citizens. We keep hearing about like, oh, let's build a housing for returning citizens. And, you know, one thing is that it's one thing to have to be incarcerated and do time with people that the only thing you have in common with is that you're being kept from society. It's another thing to come home and be like told, oh, you're going to live in that building and everybody that goes past that building is going to know that you were incarcerated. That's not the answer. The answer is partnering with the housing authority and creating vouchers for returning citizens. And that's something that Who Speaks for Me really believes in. When you talk about wanting to help people who are incarcerated, Mary talked about Unicor. And now Mary went to prison 33 years, and that was 20 some years before I got there. When I got to prison, it was 12 cents an hour. So they went up 1 cent in that time period. And
Yeah.
if you don't have, and they've closed out all the Unicor, I believe, for all the women's prisons. Again, it's a man's world in prison and in society as a whole. And so you think about that, especially if you have loved ones that are incarcerated. It's important that we figure out how to get money to people who are incarcerated for their hygiene, so they can buy something that they just like. I mean, especially at the holidays, there are all these things that come out on commissary, and it's a horrible feeling to see people not being able to get things that they need or that they desire. Making phone calls. If you make 12 cents an hour, and a phone call is 23 cents a minute, you have to work 2 hours to make a 1 minute call. So think about that. The other thing is, somebody asked a question about the hardest thing that happens in prison, or the most ridiculous thing. One of the things is all of us, Mary, Quinita, Dee, and Lakeisha, we all did time at different prisons. When you move, you lose most of your stuff. And so you have to start all over. And if you are a person who doesn't have support, then that really creates a hardship. Just because you're moved doesn't mean that you were like in trouble. They move you around just to do that. And so, and the last thing I want to come back to again is like what you can do. So we're going to be having more conversations about this. The goal is to stop this over sentencing. Nothing comes from sentencing somebody to 20, 30, 40 years in prison. It's got to stop. And so we will be continuing the dialogue, figuring out how to take our issues to the Hill, meet with our local politicians, and begin to advocate for alternatives to incarceration. We really need to look at a society and what I call the trauma to prison pipeline, and how to interrupt those oppressive systems. If you're a person with multiple marginalized identities, you are more likely to be on that trauma prison pipeline than not. And we need to begin to interrupt those systems. And that's largely a societal issue. So if you tune into our website, if you go to NCLR, we all have information about this. Pay attention to what you see in the news when you hear about cases, and support organizations like NCLR, like Who Speaks for Me or Freedom Overground. We are out here doing the work. And you know, Who Speaks for Me is a very small organization, and we try to reach a lot of people, but we can't do it alone. And in closing, I'll just say, one, thank you all for showing up, but do consider looking in the chat box, pulling out the information I've dropped of the people's of the panelists payment information, and consider a donation to them. We will be making that stipend to them at the end of this program. And this video will be available next week on our brand new website. I want to thank Amy. I want to thank Quinita for doing an excellent job. I pulled her in at the last minute and she humored me and did a great job. Even though I'm like so controlling, I know she kind of wants to shake me a little bit. And Megan, again, thank you for showing up and moderating the Q&A. And Mary, you know, my heart is with you. I'm here. Dee, we just met. I cited your case many times when I did post-conviction relief in prison. So it's an honor to meet you. And Lakeisha, you know, I'm here with you. I'm in your corner, and we're going to get these things done. Stay tuned. Go to our website, go to the Facebook page, and take a moment and reflect on what you've heard and figure out what you can do as an individual and a community to end this travesty of our elders being locked up, and try and bring them home. Thank you all.